Welcome back to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. I'm Mr. Giant and I'm here with another vibe for all you, and it's another final in a series that I'm doing here, and this one is the Empire of Mali, the final bloody act. Another one of them extra history thing again. I'm going to leave the link in the description. I've also set up a playlist called Historical Series, where all the series are put into. You could go in there and you could binge watch the series and stuff so that you have a chronology of things, which is, kind of helpful and thing, you know what I mean? And these are for all the diehard historians and stuff that want to see what the vibe is and see the reaction to it. See my reaction to it, the thing. You could go there, But, hey, let's go ahead and watch this vibe, you know what I mean? Let's YouTube and simmer.
1465. The Mali Empire is overextended, barely able to garrison its territory, and riven by internal power struggles. Sensing weakness, a new player emerges, the Sorcerer King Sunni Ali. A charismatic leader and a military genius, he is set on bringing the disorganized northern fringe of the Mali Empire, its profitable trans-Saharan trading centers, under the banner of his own empire, the Songhai. Outmatched on the battlefield and severed from their trade routes, the Mansas must learn to adapt or die.
Adapt or die. Woo! That sounds dire.
Generations of succession crises and revolts were taking their toll on Mali. The military was stretched thin, with cities on its northern fringe rebelling. Tuareg Berbers swept in from the Sahara, capturing Timbuktu and Walata, destabilizing the economic arteries that kept the empire afloat. Raiders from neighboring states pillaged trade routes that had remained safe for nearly a century. But this was all just prelude to the rise of Sunni Ali Bur. The prince that
Sunni Ali Bur
was from the old city-state of Gao, his family hailing from a region that still worshipped the spirits. His support came from the rural areas that still practiced ancestral religion, and when he took the throne of Gao in 1464, it marked a sea change in West African politics. Sunni Ali claimed to be Muslim, but that was likely political. Everybody knew that he kept...
See, polytricksters, but I'm telling you, polytricksters, even today, see politicians who don't even go to church. You could tell they don't believe in anything but the almighty dollar. And they proclaim to be pious and religious men. And God shall, you know what I mean? And they keep going off like that, holding Bibles at places that carry, and when they're not really. And people fall for that stuff. He's a good Christian man, or he's a good Muslim man, or he's a good Hindu man, you know what I mean? And I'm not talking about true people who believe. I'm talking about those that use the beliefs to manipulate people. They don't actually go to church. They don't actually go on pilgrimages. They don't actually do anything like that. They're just using it to gain power. He had his own religion, but he knew that in the world as it was there, he had to portray to be that in order to gain power. Even though he was doing his own, you know what I mean, native, if you want to call it that, religious things, and the thing about it is people knew he was doing that, according to this. And still, they probably followed him anyway. It could be because there was chaos going on, and they'll take anything that would bring even if it's on a steady stability. What you see, that's what humans do, though. You know what I mean? That's how dictators rise. They come when there's a sense of a lack of stability, and they take over. You know what I mean? You have to gauge the people's reaction to things before you make a move. My man is trying to make his move right now. Let's go see what this brethren accomplish here.
Ali claimed to be Muslim, but that was likely political. Everybody knew that he cast shells for divination and practiced traditional magic. But like many emperors before him, he had to balance the urban Muslim interests against those of the larger rural non-Muslim population. Relations between the two religions were becoming strained after centuries of coexistence, though the cracks had always been there. Urban Muslims had much more power than the rural animists, not just because they controlled court and the trade routes, but because Islamic law prevented Muslims from being enslaved. And soon, those tensions became explicitly political. After a few years of punishing territory violators, Ali claimed rule over the neighboring city of Timbuktu, even receiving an invitation from the governor to eject the Tuareg occupiers. But the scholars of Timbuktu believed their city unique in the world, ruled not by kings, but by God. When the governor died, they rescinded the offer, but it was too late. Sunni Ali was already on his way. He sacked the city for its faithlessness, forcing its leading men into exile. It was the first of many persecutions targeting Muslim cities, whom Ali saw as supporters of his rival, Mali. But Sunni Ali was not content with a two-city state. His new empire, the Songhai, would expand along the Niger River and up to the trans-Saharan trading towns, taking full advantage of the crumbling Mali Empire. To prosecute the war, he transformed the tribes of boatmen along the Niger into a crack.
I mean, can you imagine living in those places that are not yet conquered, and you know he's coming, and you know there's pretty much nothing you could do about it? And can you imagine the rumors being spread of the atrocities that he's committing, if he was committing atrocities? So you have to live, that's like living in constant fear, especially knowing he's on the way. Unlike what happened to me, I woke up one morning, boom, 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 whoa, what's going on here? You know? I tend not to believe rumors. There was rumors, but they're inevitable. When you know they're coming, they're marching in your direction, and there's nothing you could do. That's why we have so many refugees. People are just running. I mean, the horror stories that they hear that's going to happen to them, they're trying to get out of it. You know what I mean? And that puts strains on other municipalities, for lack of a better word. We do this to each other, though. I know some people don't like me using the term we, but it's the truth, man. People are using, okay, take it back. We are using the system to control each other. When we supposed to control the system, since we're the ones that created the system, or one of us created the system. But we not so much allow, a lot of the times it just happens that certain people get into the position of power to control us using the system.
To prosecute
Hot
the
in
war,
here.
he transformed the tribes of boatmen along the Niger into a crack riverine navy, and used this new force to secure the river's fertile delta region. Sunni Ali was not one to trifle with. He won every battle he fought, and often with extreme brutality. But when he drowned in a boating accident, his successor, Askia Muhammad, proved more traditionally Muslim, continuing Ali's conquest, but also patronizing learning and science in Timbuktu. He reorganized the Songhai government as a meritocracy, where talented men could rise in state service regardless of their clan affiliation. And to show the Songhai's new status as the rulers of West Africa, he made the Hajj. By 1500...
You see? The next guy come along, like I said, you know, it could either be a ruthless dictator. This guy seemed to be a combination of that. He's still conquering, but there's a little bit of twinges of humanity telling you, you know, if you do this and you know, with the education and stuff, you could rise regardless to where you're from. Sometimes that happens.
The Songhai ruled more territory than Mali ever had, and in 1545 the Songhai delivered Mali's greatest indignity. They invaded, occupying Niani and forcing the Mansa to flee. The harried Mansa regrouped in the mountains and drove the invaders out, but the message was clear. Mali might still have a continuous monarchy and rule large amounts of territory. It might hold gold mines and a piece of the trans-Saharan trade, but it was no longer a great power. Songhai middlemen stood between their gold and the markets of North Africa. So, battered and bruised, Mali responded to Songhai's rise by adapting, increasingly setting its sights toward the Atlantic coast, which offered a unique opportunity, because Portuguese ships had begun to arrive on Mali's shores, offering textiles, rum, and manufactured goods for gold.
Here comes the
In the
rum.
early 1400s, Portugal had entered a period of exploration and trading voyages patronized by Prince Henry the Navigator, and the tales of Mali's wealth drew them to this unseen kingdom that they called the Gold Coast.
Thus begins
But
a
Portugal
10 years
had another objective.
alignment.
When reconquering the Iberian Peninsula from its North African rulers, the Spanish and Portuguese had come into contact with enslaved Africans who had been transported via the trans-Saharan trade, and they embraced this concept. On early Atlantic voyages, they seized the Canary Islands in order to use them as a base for slave raids on the coast of Africa. The first Portuguese expeditions to Mali got massacred by locals who were far better equipped to fight in the coastal waterways. But in 1456, a Portuguese explorer made it up the Gambia River and opened the first trade negotiations with a Mali governor. It was a meeting that would change history. Because despite their rocky start, it became clear that Mali and the Portuguese had the same problem. Songhai had monopolized the trans-Saharan trade routes, taking a bite out of every transaction in the gold and salt trades. But opening direct trade between Mali and Europe via the Atlantic coast meant that both sides would profit, and they did. The coastal region boomed.
Comes
and
down to
Songhai,
money.
ironically, found traffic along their new trans-Saharan routes beginning to slow. But the Gold Coast trade wouldn't last, because the same boom in European exploration that had opened up African ports also flooded Europe with the looted gold of Central and South American empires, driving Mali's purchasing power down. The Portuguese, Spanish, French, Dutch, British, Danish, and Swedish traders that were showing up on the coast now came less for gold and more for slaves. European slave markets were booming. By the close of the 15th century, 10% of Lisbon's population was of African origin, and early colonists found that parts of the New World, such as Brazil and Jamaica, were ideal for sugar cultivation, and those deadly plantations had an unending appetite for the blood and labor of enslaved people. It was the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, one of the greatest tragedies and involuntary migrations in human history. Over the course of the next 3.5 centuries, European slavers forcibly transported at least 12 million people to Europe and America, and we are still sorting through the consequences of that trade today. So, let's just pause for a moment here. The transatlantic slave trade was a corrosive system that left legacies of violence and inequality wherever it touched, including West Africa. To tell you the truth, there is so much involved with the transatlantic slave trade that after many rewrites, we ultimately...
See, now, this is a thing, it's history and we need to know it. We need to understand it. However, like he said in the video, it left a lasting negative connotation on society. Now that's what we have to deal with. Like a lot of people argue about the slave trade this and the slave trade that, and they focus on the slave trade, but they're not focusing on the remnants of culture and attitudes that is left. And while we're arguing about that, the slave trade is still thriving in the world. So we haven't done anything to curtail it from happening again because we're too busy talking about that it did happen. And at some point in history, everybody's or most people's people have been enslaved. Shoot. The way we live now is a form of serfdom, pretty much. We got people out here working and struggling to make ends meet and can't. And even though nobody's being chained and whipped, a lot of places have forces that like police forces that would pick on the poor, not just black, not just white, just poor people in general. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not making a general statement. I'm just going from things that I've seen and I've paid attention to. Like if I go walk in a rich area, I would get stopped because I don't belong. Just like the slaves belong in the fields. I know it's like a more dire situation, the slavery part of it, you know what I mean? But when you really think about it, I mean, we just here working to survive. And I'm talking about where I am. You know, I'm not speaking for the whole world. I'm talking about where I am. And I know for a fact where I came from, it's like that. We simply working to survive. Though different in actual implementation, it's kind of the same thing. We just struggling to survive, and a lot of people are suffering. I mean, where I live here, man, I see people suffering. And no, people talk about it, but they sort of blame the people who are suffering for their suffrage. Well, it's their fault. There is jobs out there, but the jobs aren't paying enough to keep up with the cost of living, and people just don't seem to get that. And it's poor people that are terrorizing poor people a lot, because the mentality is to pretend to be what you're not. And I'm only saying this because I get into conversations every day with people. You know what I mean? And it's like poor people just looking down on other poor people when they're pretty much in the same shoes. It's like a implicit caste system where they're thinking that they are, you know, better than or more important than. But let's continue, you know what I mean? So it's the here and now, you know, we gotta fix. We can't relive the past, can't change it. What we can change is where we are if we pay attention. You know what I'm saying and things? I don't know. Let's keep going here.
Much involved with the transatlantic slave trade that after many rewrites, we ultimately decided that we would need to create a whole series and consult with experts to do this subject justice. Because only discussing the impact on Mali risks glossing over the fact that European chattel slavery was a uniquely cruel institution in world history. Also, we worried that dealing with this as a side issue would leave out a lot of the nuance in how these systems of slavery intersected. Because while it is true that West Africa had traded enslaved people for centuries, we don't want to suggest any equivalence in these two systems. So, for the sake of
let me say this also. African tribes sold Africans to the Europeans. And don't think for 1 minute that that didn't cause dissension between the African tribes. Because, you know, I did some reactions of Africa to Somalis, and they were arguing against each other, and they were saying that certain of their African people still think that they are slaves because they enslaved them. Crazy, ain't it?
For centuries, we don't want to suggest any equivalence in these two systems. So, for the sake of understanding what happens next, let's leave it at this. The transatlantic slave trade increasingly drained manpower from the West African kingdoms, making states like the diminished Mali less able to stand up against outside aggressors, including colonialist interventions. In 1591, Morocco moved in from the north, hoping to seize the gold routes in order to pay for war debt. They razed the salt towns in the Sahara and brought a new terror to West Africa, the arquebus. Songhai crumbled before the cough of gunpowder. Moroccan armies sacked Timbuktu. The Songhai capital of Gao fell, ending 900 years of continuous rule as a city-state. The Moroccans marched on Mali, but Mansa Mahmud Keita IV met them. In a last, proud display of imperial valor, his army engaged the invaders. Gunpowder jetted, cutting down the Mansa's infantry, harrowing the fine cavalry that was Sundiata's legacy. The warriors of Mali stood firm against the gunfire, shielding their homeland with their bodies, reforming every time their units were cut to ribbons. The bloodshed was atrocious, but they forced a draw. The Moroccans, stunned by this suicidal bravery, turned back. But despite that brave defense, Mali would suffer the fate of all empires. In 1610, when Mansa Mahmud Keita IV died, his three sons fought over what remained. Regional wars would become the norm until a neighboring power sacked and burned Niani in 1670. After 4 centuries, the Mali Empire was gone. In that time, it had knit together the pieces of shattered Ghana, become an economic powerhouse, dazzled the world with its wealth, and even outlived its rival, Songhai. Today, the Empire of Mali is often remembered for Mansa Musa's wealth, but that's kind of unfair. It is true that the rulers of West Africa were rich, but Ghana, Songhai, and Mali were so much more than just that. They were patrons of religion and military innovators, builders who erected houses of worship and learning. Songhai craftsmen created masks and statuary that Picasso cited as an artistic influence. But perhaps Mali's most incredible feat was to foster a multicultural population rich in diverse languages, cultures, and religious beliefs at a time when much of the world was still riven by religious conflict. Indeed, it is no accident that in 1959, when the region threw off the yoke of colonialism and needed a name for itself, one of those newly born nations looked back into its history and decided to name itself Mali.
That was thoroughly interesting. Thoroughly interesting. There's a pattern in history here. Great leaders, they fall chaos. Or somebody comes along and does a little bit of things to make people sort of equal. But money is driving everything, and it's always been driving everything, man. It's crazy, isn't it? And we keep doing it over and over and over, you know what I mean? Everybody's got to have the Bugatti and the Maserati and the 12 bedroom houses and stuff, you know? Everybody's aspiring to that kind of stuff. Wish everybody could just aspire. God, this is going to sound cliche, to some peace and love, man. And let's just have enough to enjoy and have enough to sustain us through our time when we could just sit back and be leisurely and enjoy the peace that we created. You know what I mean? We just gotta dive right in. Link in the description to this video. Go check out Extra History, man. They got some good stuff there. And you know, if we keep seeing that we're making the same historical mistake over and over again, maybe at some point enough people gonna go, hey, we stupid. We need to start enjoying it, man. You know what I mean? I'm gonna go on a road trip here soon. I'm gonna vlog it, put it on my other channel. I'll show you guys, but I want to go on a road trip here next weekend. I'm gonna go to Virginia. I live in West Virginia. My buddy's from Virginia, so we're gonna go to Virginia. There's a place called Skyline there where you could go climb up and just enjoy nature and stuff like that. You know what I mean? There shouldn't be any fighting and that kind of peacefulness, you know what I mean, and thing. But I'm babbling. I'm gonna let you guys go and thing, you know what I mean? Take care of each other, man. Try to go out and get to know a stranger. And don't go, oh, that could be dangerous. If you pay attention, you're gonna know who is gonna harm you. I came to a whole different country. I have traveled, and I'm still here. Just gotta pay attention, all right? Make life cool runnings, y'all.